Welcome to Ground Truth. I'm your host, Sam Faddis. With us today, an amazing guest, JJ Bakhtiari. JJ is an Iranian. He's an Iranian dissident. He's much more than a dissident. He's a patriot, a man of incredible courage who has actually worked his entire adult life to end the nightmare that is the rule of the Ayatollahs in Tehran. And JJ is coming to us today actually from an undisclosed location because he is actively hunted by the Iranian regime every day. He is on a kill list. JJ, you are a very brave guy. You have incredible insights. We're honored to have you with us today.
First of all, Sam, let me thank you for having me on your program, and I also wish to thank all the members of your team at andmagazine.com.
JJ, one of the hallmarks of Ground Truth is substance, right? We don't do gotcha moments. We don't do spin. We don't say to some guest, hey, you got exactly 3 minutes. Tell us how to fix all of the problems in the Middle East, that kind of nonsense. And I think it is a foundational thing for people to understand who they're listening to, right? Who is this guy, JJ Bakhtiari? So I gave you an introduction before that was all of about 15 or 20 seconds. And I think it would be useful for people to hear directly from you who you are, where you came from, your family, how you got into this fight.
Well, I can tell you that I was born in Iran in 1964 to an affluent family. Both my parents were from the Bakhtiari tribe, and I had a normal childhood, if I can say that, until the age of 8, where I was sent to England to a boarding school. I spent the next 10 years there. Something extraordinary happened 6 months after the revolution of 79, when the Islamic hounds were looking for my grandfather. They decided that it would be perhaps a good idea to kidnap one of his grandsons in exchange. But that never happened thanks to the MI5, and I was taken away from school for 3 months for my security, and finally my grandfather managed to replace me in the same school with a lot of bargaining. And a year later, unfortunately, the worst possible incident happened where an Islamic group that consisted of a Lebanese man by the name of Anis Nakash and 2 Iranian terrorists came to Paris, and they tried to assassinate my grandfather. I was in the house at the time with another member of the family, and we were protected by 4 French policemen. 2 of the policemen were killed, so was our neighbor, and it was an incredibly unfortunate incident, and I was 15 at the time. The next real encounter, if I can call it that, happened in the August of 1991, where again, terrorists from the regime came to Paris, and this time they managed to assassinate my grandfather. And that was incredibly heavy for me, alongside the fact that my mother passed away 2 weeks later from a heartache. So I call that a double jeopardy incident, if I may say so. And life went on for me in the best way possible until 2004, where again the Islamic hounds came calling for me, and this time they came and destroyed my restaurant in Bahrain, and I knew full well that it was all paid for, orchestrated by the Iranian embassy in Manama, Bahrain. And that was the last straw as far as I was concerned.
Yeah, well, I think people probably now are beginning to have some idea what I was talking about when I was talking about your raw courage and what it means to be in this fight for you personally. Let's talk a little bit about life in Iran, right? Americans see, the sort of death to the great Satan marches and have this general impression of an oppressive Islamic regime. But what I don't think they have any appreciation for is what is it like to live in Iran as an Iranian? What is day-to-day life like there now?
In order to give you an example of life in Iran today, I think it's best if I read you a very short quote by an Iranian. He writes, Life is like being a fish in a rapidly shrinking puddle of water under scorching sun in the middle of the desert. And as you know, it's so ironic that when Khomeini came to Iran, he promised everyone free water and free electricity. Today, there is no water, and there is certainly a huge lack of electricity. So it would be fair to say that the man lied even before setting foot on Iranian soil when he was being, let's say, amused by Western powers before he returned to Iran. Secondly, the life under Islamic Iran is unbearable. I am certain that sometime before the revolution, a few years probably before the revolution, one of the Ayatollahs must have run into one of George Orwell's best books, Animal Farm. And once he read that, and he thought if he could amalgamate that with Islam, the perfect society would exist. And if you look at it, this is exactly what they have done. So life under Islamic regime is pretty much close to living in North Korea today. And imagine there is a religion on top of whatever else you find in North Korea, and that is life in Iran today.
That's a pretty dismal picture you've painted there, JJ. But as bad as it is for everybody, I got to imagine that under an Islamic regime, life for women is even more horrific.
Life has been unbearable for women. I mean, this is not just to do with the Ayatollahs and their arrival in 1979, the arrival to power, I should say. They've been there for the last 1400 years. But the women in Iran have suffered tremendously since 1979. Islam does not recognize a woman as par to a man. Islam does not recognize that a woman can be just as intelligent and helpful in society as a man. They always have this huge complexes towards women, and they really don't know how to act with women. So making them wear scarves, chadors, not be able to sing, dance, any kind of joy in life. The purpose of an Islamic regime, just as you've seen it with ISIS, and there are so many similarities between ISIS and the Ayatollah regime, is that they basically kill the joy of life. There's no room for laughter, music, or anything. All they want is you to mourn the death of a bunch of Arabs who killed each other 1400 years ago, and they call it Ashura and all these names which are, or I should say, should be alien to a nation like Iran with its intelligence and history. It is very, very, very sad for us to be under this regime. And I know and I hope it will soon end.
Okay, so in this madhouse, in Animal Farm, as you describe it, I'm an average Iranian. I get up every day. What is my daily life all about?
With everything going on in Iran, the daily life for an average Iranian is basically getting up and trying to find $2, $3, $4, $5 and buying food with that. That is their daily life. They have no other choice but to fight. The struggle is continuous, and this is one of the ways the regime has managed to subdue the masses by making them work so hard and try and find a few dollars to make ends meet while they themselves live a life that many people in the West can only dream of. It is extremely sad. So right now it is a life of survival. They're just trying to make enough money to feed the family and nothing more. Borrowing money from the banks is impossible. The only time it is possible is for the Ayatollahs that never pay the banks back. They never have the intention of paying the banks back from the start. And the bank manager and all concerned are very much aligned together. And this is, again, very, very sad for the entire country and disastrous for the economy.
Well, JJ, you've sort of skirted around this or touched on it briefly, but let's dig into this. Let's talk about corruption, because one of the things that I think people don't perhaps realize is how you have this holier than thou theocracy, these ayatollahs who are preaching to everyone all of this supposedly pure wisdom that they have derived from the Quran and so forth. But in fact, these guys are up to their eyeballs in just making money.
Well, corruption is the biggest accolade one can give to the Ayatollahs alongside murder, rape, and international terrorism. Now, they have managed to snake away hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars in the past 40 years for their own benefit. There are so many offshore bank accounts that belong to the Ayatollahs, the head of the IRGC, the senior officers, and other people who have collaborated with this regime for the past 4 decades. Now, one of the problems they're trying to discuss right now is how to improve the economy. And that's not going to happen. You can never improve an economy where the biggest problem is corruption. And the Ayatollahs will never walk away from that. The corruption includes money laundering for terrorist organizations and basically enriching themselves. Now, if you took the best team, let's say you took a group of men and women who have Nobel Prizes to their name in economics, and you took them to Iran and you asked them to solve the problems, they would all look at you and say, it is impossible because this regime is corrupt and a corrupt regime can never recover. Despite having 10% of the oil's riches, they will never be able to redress the economy. And that is extremely heartbreaking. So shuffling government members today is a joke. It doesn't matter. It's really a case of the pot calling the kettle black.
So let's just dig into this just a tad more here, because one of the things that has always amazed me, stunned me over the years of dealing with Iran, is the extent to which the closer you are to the tip of the spear, if you will, in terms of this so-called Islamic revolution, the dirtier you are. I mean, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps guys are just filthy, are just rolling in money and corruption, right?
Well, going back to your last question again quickly regarding the corruption and the life that the Ayatollahs, the mullahs, their families are living is quite extraordinary, a very, very high standard. And yes, the IRGC senior officers are also involved in nearly 40% of the Iranian economy. So you can imagine how their influence has made the economy just going downhill. What does a soldier know about running a bank? What does he understand about inflation? The wrong people are in the wrong posts. And this is because Khamenei wants it this way. This is the way he manages to keep power within Iran and continue his domestic, I should say, cultural genocide and the killing of Iranians and the international terrorism that we have all noticed on all continents. This is the life that they lead, and the people who pay for this are the victims of terrorism and the Iranians that live alongside them, which make up about 90%. I can tell you 90% of the people in Iran today are suffering in unimaginable ways, and they see no way out.
So, JJ, you have this North Korea of the Islamic world, this incredibly oppressive entity. But this thing has not been around for 6 months or a year. I mean, this dates back to 1979 when the Shah fell. So, how in the name of God do these guys retain power given the horror that they have created?
That's a good question. Why does the regime stay in power? Well, the oil and gas. Iran today has proven reserves of 10% of the world's oil and gas reserves. So other countries are extremely, let's say, polite towards you when you have such reserves. And those countries include Canada, United Kingdom, Germany, France, Russia, China, India, South Korea. Among some of these names, you would tell me, but these are democratic countries. Are they? Well, if you come and look at their activities in Iran for the past 39 years, you will see that they have bribed so many ayatollahs and they have managed to purchase oil and gas below the market price. Now, the Ayatollahs are desperate enough to sell the gas or the oil below the price because they know they cannot have a real market because they're under sanctions. However, this has led to the delight of many Western countries. So it's kind of sad in a way to call themselves democratic when they know what they're doing is basically pure evil and they're hurting the Iranian people. I do understand that each country has to look after its interests, but if they are going to do it, just the way Russia does it or China does it, it would be great if they would stop talking about democracy and just talk about the interest. Perhaps many people like myself would have more, let's say, devotion to their theories, but currently I cannot respect any of the above mentioned countries because they are working with the Ayatollahs, and some of them will remain despite more sanctions coming. So yes, the Ayatollahs have managed to survive thanks to great friends. There were others such as the Castro brothers, Robert Mugabe, Evo Morales, Hugo Chavez. The list is not very endearing. However, they have managed to do this alongside the fear factor that they have managed to put in Iran as well. One must not forget that today, if you go in the street and you're against the regime, as we've seen even in the last 48 hours, huge demonstrations going on in Iran, the answer to your demands is simple: a bullet. That's what will come your way. Now, how can you avoid that when you have nothing to fight with? So a lot of the Iranian politicians in exile, or they want to call themselves opposition groups, they all agree that Iran should go into a phase of mass demonstrations, total disobedience, but none of them have mentioned how they can combat the regime. Will all the soldiers turn their backs to the regime and join the masses? Perhaps. But so far they haven't done that. And all they've done is kill. So maybe the opposition groups should start thinking about other alternatives apart from sending the masses to be slaughtered by the regime.
Okay, so we're not alone in the world. We're not face to face with this menace by ourselves. Where are our European allies?
You speak of European allies, but let me make it crystal clear. Never has Germany profited more from Iran than under the Ayatollahs. They have absolutely no integrity. They have no morals regarding this country. They try and get as much out of it as possible and as fast as possible. And the Ayatollahs have played along with the game because they have had no choice. When you have Germany or the United Kingdom or France on your side, what do the masses think? They think that everything's going to be fine, everything's going to be okay. But that's not the case. For Mrs. Merkel or Mrs. Theresa May or Mr. Macron, neither of them could care less about the Iranian population. All they want is to see numbers. And the last 3 years, they have all made incredibly big investments, despite Mr. Trump telling them, even as a candidate, that he would pull out of the JCPOA. Either did not believe that Mr. Trump would become president, nor did they believe once president he would do such a thing. Well, I'm glad to say that he did become president, and I'm glad to say that he did do it. And the Europeans should live with it. Just like some of the media in America cannot live with the fact that the Republican president is in office, these people should understand that the Iranian people come first. And they have a long memory. They will remember who their friends are. And I assure you today, the two friends, however unlikely that some masses might think, are the United States and Israel. Yes, they want regime change in Iran. And I know that the regime change in Iran will not happen until the United States takes a definite and final step towards this. This can come as a war. The friction in the Persian Gulf right now is so intense that the first carrier or the first frigate, any US naval ship is attacked by an Iranian, this could lead into full-scale war. And if that does happen, well, it's quite simple. Iran will resemble Afghanistan by the time the dust settles. There is no other possible outcome from this war. Iran will lose everything, and more importantly, it will lose many, many lives. And the Europeans do not care about this, and they have shown only interest in oil and gas. From 2004 to 2010, when I was there, I spoke to many diplomats, and it was extraordinary the way they wanted even me to believe that with the help of the West and certain reforms, Iran will be fine in the long run. They were clueless about what they were saying. Instead of listening to Iranian diplomats, they should have read the reports coming from their agents in Iran. And that always showed that the country is going towards a total disaster. And now it has happened. And only now the Europeans are waking up. But let me tell you, it is little too late, even if they start talking about human lives, or even worse, when they talk about human rights. They are just making a total mockery of the institution.
Okay, so you get the chance to advise directly the policymakers in the United States government who make the key decisions. What should the United States government be doing? What should it do?
When the United States government fights the Ayatollahs on all continents, basically they're doing the Iranian people a great favor. By that I mean, if global terrorism stops, then billions and billions and billions of dollars will not be spent on terrorism. They might go to their personal accounts, but at least we will know it will not go to terrorism. And Iran cannot afford to give away a dime right now. The country is in total chaos. The production of oil will go down. The exports will go down. The dollar has reached heights like never before. If I may just give an example to your audience, during the Shah's regime up till 1979, $1 represented 7 tomans. Today, $1 represents 11,700 tomans. That is a kind of economy run by Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe, and that's exactly where we're going. And the Ayatollahs don't really care too much about that, because their Swiss bank accounts and their Monaco bank accounts and all their offshore accounts are full, and they don't even know what to do with that money. That money supposedly is for the survival of Islam, but in reality, when you look at the children and grandchildren of many of the Ayatollahs living in, let's pick a country out of the blue, Canada, Vancouver to be more precise, living in luxury. Why doesn't the Canadian government ask these people, where is the money coming from? How do you make $100 million transaction without the KYC, without really knowing who your client is? Why are they allowing the Ayatollahs to move funds out of Iran and into their countries? The answer might be obvious, but I am sure that these kind of activities will have huge and negative results for governments such as Canada. And the United States must speak to their friendly neighbors to stop this kind of activity. It is totally detrimental to the Iranian economy, and it's an insult to most Iranians.
Okay, let's talk about terrorism. Let's talk about Iran, about terrorism, what it does around the globe, because these days primarily people think of Islamic terrorism in terms of ISIS. But the Ayatollahs have been in this business for a long time.
And yes, when I talk about global terrorism, I'm talking about countries like Yemen, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Palestine, Lebanon, and Argentina. So this has been going on a long time, and they have killed over 225 political dissidents in Europe and across other continents. So this is not a new phenomenon. When Europeans act as if they are shocked or they're unhappy, they have collaborated with the Ayatollahs. They have exchanged information. They have exchanged information that has allowed the Ayatollahs to further their corrupt regime all over the continents. Their Islam is like a gangrene. In 1979, no one believed my grandfather that this would lead to total disaster, not only for the country, but for the region. And 39 years, 40 years later, that is exactly what has happened. I hope the United States continues to fight these Iranian terrorists all over the world. And one day, we will have a reputation of being loving and peaceful people instead of this barbaric acts of terrorism that are carried out by these people incessantly for over 4 decades.
Talk to me about Israel. Israel is usually viewed in the Islamic world as being an enemy of all Muslim nations. How do they look to you when it comes to this issue?
It's true to say that Israel has also made its position very clear towards the Iranian government. As we saw, there were several attacks by the Israelis on Iranian positions in Syria, and they absolutely obliterated the Iranian positions. The so-called Iranian Napoleon, Mr. Soleimani, and his friends ran for their lives. Why wasn't there a response? Since Iran can take out America, surely Israel is even a smaller feat. It is all lies, that is why. The regime lies incessantly. That's all they do. To provide the people with a fear factor that will deter them from even thinking of attacking Iran. If you look to the north of Iran, if you go to Chechnya, all the Muslim brothers of Mr. Soleimani who have been begging him to help, why has he denied their help? Is Mr. Soleimani scared of Mr. Putin? Is that the reason? Most definitely. Not only he is scared of Mr. Putin, he's probably even more scared of Mr. Netanyahu and Lieberman. So I think people should realize there is a lot of hot air coming out of that Iranian government. And there is a struggle going on right now because Mr. Rouhani, the nice man, now wants to become the leader. He wants to replace Khamenei when he dies. So the IRGC are not too happy about that because they're kind of thinking maybe we'll put one of our own as head of the country next. So that is playing out right now. And in a month's time, Mr. Rouhani is supposed to give an answer to all Iran's problems. And obviously he will have absolutely nothing to say. And I hope by then, because of hyperinflation going on in Iran and all the other pressures, the people will finally go out in the street and the demonstrations will commence peacefully. But I hope there will be confrontation with the army. I hope the Iranian people will use arms to confront this regime. There is no other way. It is wishful thinking that in Iran we could possibly have an orange revolution. What happened in Ukraine in 2004, 2005 was fantastic when it happened. But the long-term results have been pretty catastrophic for the Ukrainians as well. So Iran must have its own style of revolution. In other words, people must do what they see fit in order to overthrow these Ayatollahs once and for all. There is no collaboration with them. There's no reforms amongst the Ayatollahs. They must leave the country physically, and all their doctrine must be thrown to the garbage where it belongs. We in Iran, we need real education, real science, and not to be told about this Arabian mythology that does not concern us. That is not for us. It is much more interesting to read the works of Albert Einstein than that of many Arabs who left this world 1500 years ago.
A minute ago, I asked you about the United States government and what it should do. Let's take the other side of that. What should the United States government not do?
I think the United States should not give the Iranian people mixed signals i.e., when Mr. Pompeo talks about 12 criterias before meeting the Iranian president, and then Mr. Trump turns around a few days later and says, "We will meet you without conditions," I assure you that confuses a lot of people. I would not be surprised if people in Washington are surprised by that. And I think they should be more in unison as far as that aspect is concerned. I'm sure that helping Iranians to understand what the Americans' intentions are long term would be extremely useful. Although I know they cannot spell it out, but I'm sure the Iranian people will understand.
Okay, look, we're coming to the end of the interview here, and I've sort of been driving the train with questions. What are the things that you think that are important to amplify on, expand on at this point?
I just want to go back to one of your former questions regarding how the Ayatollahs had managed to keep power for so long. And I must read some of their accolades that, it's very unique to most dictators, but this is what the Ayatollahs have done, and I'll be quick about it. One of the activities have been harboring terrorists, assassinations, and bombing on several continents, rampant state sponsors Ponzi schemes. This is very, very popular with the Ayatollahs. International terrorism with groups such as Hamas, ISIS, Hezbollah, extortion, execution for apostasy, theft, torture of men, women, and children, money laundering, bribery, collective punishment, prosecution of minority groups such as the Baha'i, Jews, Christians, Zoroastrians, rape of virgin girls before execution, that is Islamic law, and they're very proud of that. Stoning of women, execution for homosexuality. It is a pity why European and American LGBT groups are not voicing their concerns. It would be most helpful, because the number of homosexuals in Iran are not what Mr. Ahmadinejad say. I assure you, they exist, and they are going through a very, very difficult time, and their lives could be taken at a moment's notice. They publicize public hangings, fake economic reports, making of synthetic drugs and drug distribution. I assure you, the drug distribution that basically sends trucks from Iran to Afghanistan with petrol, and they come back with drugs, and they're destined either for domestic use or towards Turkey for international use. If Pablo Escobar saw the scale and the efficiency of drug distribution in Iran, he would have been very, very surprised. It is unbelievable that how the people in Iran are being subdued by drugs, by the regime, on purpose, just the way the IRGC has laboratories where they fabricate synthetic drugs to subdue the teenagers. And they sell it at a price less than a cigarette. So it is available for everyone, it is encouraged by the regime, and the results are catastrophic. Pedophilia is also encouraged by the regime, and I wonder where they get that idea from. Maybe it also came from a book written 1400 years ago. The destruction of the flora and fauna. It is so sad to watch images of Iran by satellite and watch all the rivers dry up and all the green areas become brown. This country is dying, and the animals, well, unfortunately, Iran does not care about animals. The Ayatollahs have declared most animals as dirty, and the only animals that really are taken care of are the horses. Apart from that, the rest are just nuisances, and many are killed on the spot. Many people will tell you they have had their dogs killed in the middle of the street, broad daylight, because one of the Iranian agents did not like the sight of the dog and thought that it was a menace to national security. So those are some of the accolades that they have installed the fear factor in Iran. And that's how they have managed to keep this regime going. People are afraid to face live ammunition. If they weren't, they would be totally mad. But one day, I hope they will come out and fight them with the same arms. And I hope, and I'm certain, that justice will prevail.
JJ, as always, incredibly illuminating. You and I could probably have this conversation for many, many hours. And I have the feeling that this is definitely the first of quite a number of conversations we're going to have on this really important topic. I look forward to having a drink with you in a free Tehran. Last words to you, sir.
My last comment would be to tell the Iranian people that one thing is for sure. The Ayatollahs will all perish sooner or later, and that Iran will never die. And I am certain that one day soon we will all be able to start a regime that will lead us to democracy. It will be a long and arduous journey, but I am sure that all Iranians know that that is the only way that we can make our country strong for all of us. Sam, again, thank you for everything, and I hope that I'll be speaking to you in the near future. Thank you very much to you and your team again. Thank you.
Folks, that does it for us with this edition of Ground Truth. I'm your host, Sam Faddis. Look forward to seeing you next time.